Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into the mind of the Dutch thinker Herman Bavinck, who was on a quest to find a worldview that could make sense of our pretty divided experience of reality.
So, let's start with a really fundamental question. When you have a thought, is that you actively doing the thinking, or is it more like an event that just happens to you? Should we say I think, or should we say it thinks? Kind of like how we say it is raining. It's not something we're doing, it's just happening. Bavinck says this simple question actually exposes a massive split in how we experience the world. It's like we're living in two different worlds at the same time. On one hand, you've got physis. That's the world of nature. This is the world of becoming, a place of cause and effect, where things just are. But then, on the other hand, we live in the world of ethos, the world of our character, our morality. That's the world of acting, and it's all about choice, duty, and what ought to be.
And the split, this division, it isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. It creates this really deep tension in how we understand ourselves and really our place in the whole universe.
Think about it for a second. The world of science, of physis, it tells you that you're basically a link in a huge chain of cause and effect. You're a product of your DNA, your environment, the laws of physics. But then your conscience, from the world of ethos, pipes up and speaks with this absolute authority. It hits you with these ideal moral standards and demands that you follow them, and it completely ignores your personal history or what you feel you're capable of.
And these moral laws, they don't mess around, right? They're totally unconditional. They don't ask what's possible or what's convenient for you. They just flat out state what you ought to do. And just like that, you have this whole other world of value, of truth, goodness, and beauty that exists right alongside the world of cold, hard facts. And a lot of the time, they're in conflict. Okay, so if this sense of ought is so powerful, where in the world does it come from? Bavinck points out that for centuries, the answer was pretty simple. It comes from God. His authority was the bedrock for all moral law. But then modern science comes onto the scene, and that whole foundation starts to shake, kicking off this really urgent hunt for a new source of moral authority. You can really see the whole intellectual journey laid out here. The foundation for morality just keeps shifting. For a long time, it's God. Then, with the philosopher Immanuel Kant, it moves to universal human reason. And finally, by the 19th century, it shifts again to history itself, with this new idea that our moral sense just kind of evolved over time. Now, Kant's big idea was something he called autonomy, and it was truly revolutionary. The thinking goes like this. We don't actually need an external authority like God to give us moral laws because we are our own lawgivers. Morality, he said, is grounded right inside our own rational nature. So, to save morality, he basically tried to build a firewall. Step one, he put a limit on science. He said science can only tell us about the physical world, period. Step two, he cordoned off morality into its own safe zone, governed by something he called practical reason. And step three, he said that powerful "you shall" from our conscience actually comes from within us, making humanity the ultimate source of its own moral code. But here's the catch. Kant's whole project really depends on this idea of a stable, universal human nature. And the 19th century idea of evolution just blew a giant hole in that foundation. Because if our moral sense isn't some absolute thing, if it just developed over millions of years, then Kant's whole project kind of falls apart, and our sense of duty just becomes another part of that world of becoming. So where does that leave us? Well, according to Bavinck, this slide from autonomy to evolution leads us straight into the arms of a really dangerous and, frankly, self-defeating relativism. Bavinck uses this quote to really drive home the problem. What he's getting at is if things like truth and goodness are just temporary products of history, then they lose their power. They aren't absolute anymore. A truth for today is, it's an absurdity. The very idea of truth suggests something timeless, something eternal. And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical game. Bavinck warned that when people stop believing in absolute truth, they don't just become free and open-minded. Nope. Instead, they grab onto their own relative truths and make them absolute. And this, he argued, leads to really dangerous stuff: aggressive nationalism, racial fanaticism, and eventually society itself starts to decay, where freedom turns into anarchy, which then flips right into tyranny. Bavinck points out this fascinating contradiction you see in systems like Marxism. On the one hand, the theory says all ideas, morality included, are just byproducts of economic systems. Okay, but then on the other hand, its followers make these fiery, passionate moral judgments against capitalism, throwing around words like injustice and exploitation, but those words only make sense if you actually believe in some kind of absolute moral standard to begin with.
This quote just nails it, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the logical trap of relativism. Think about it. To stand up and say all truth is relative is itself an absolute statement about truth. So the very act of trying to prove relativism forces you to stand on the absolute ground that you're trying to say doesn't exist. You literally destroy your own argument just by making it. All right, so if Kant's idea of autonomy fails and historical relativism is a dead end, what's the answer? Bavinck says, well, there's a third way forward. He basically flips the whole problem on its head. He says, instead of trying to explain away our gut instinct that truth, goodness, and beauty are real, let's take that instinct seriously. He argues that the very fact that we have these objective standards is like a compass, and it's pointing beyond our physical world to a transcendent reality, a reality that could only originate in God. And the name for Bavinck's solution is theonomy. It's pretty much the exact opposite of autonomy. Instead of humanity being its own lawgiver, theonomy says that God's law is the one single objective foundation for everything, for nature, for morality, for all of life. And this is where it all comes together. You can see how theonomy creates this incredible harmony. That world of nature, of becoming, is finally unified with the world of morality, or acting, because they both come from the same source, God. Our knowledge, and even history itself, all find their ultimate meaning in this one coherent framework. The divided world is finally made whole again. So this isn't just about finding a personal worldview that makes you feel better. For Bavinck, this gives meaning and purpose to the entire sweep of human history, and it presents every single one of us with a final, unavoidable choice. At the end of the day, Bavinck argues it all boils down to this. On one side, you have autonomy, the self is king, driven by that subjective internal cry of the I wants. On the other side is theonomy, which submits to an objective reality that comes from a creator, and it responds to the moral law of you shall. It's a choice between whether man is the measure of all things or God is. And Bavinck's whole analysis leaves us right here with this really provocative thought. He suggests that every worldview out there, whether you're religious or not, is ultimately built on some kind of absolute foundation. There's just no neutral ground. So the real question isn't if you have an absolute, it's which one have you chosen,